All right, let's jump right into this incredibly ambitious explainer. Today, we're basically tracing the entire operating system of human civilization. I mean, from our absolute humblest beginnings as tiny atoms just floating in the void, all the way up to the dawn of the modern world. We're going to see exactly how humanity organized itself to survive, thrive, and eventually dominate the planet. To make sense of over 3 billion years of history without giving you whiplash, we're going to break our journey down into 5 distinct eras: the seeds of civilization, philosophers, republics, and kings, the age of faith, conquerors of the world, and finally, Renaissance to revolution. Let's get into it. So, we started as floating atoms roughly 3 billion years ago, evolved into early hominids, and eventually Homo sapiens spread across the globe. But the real game changer? That happened around 4000 BCE in Mesopotamia. Over in the Sumerian city of Uruk, humans invented hand mills to crush grains. This was the agricultural revolution, a massive leap forward that allowed Uruk to support a mind-blowing 50,000 residents. That brings us to our first era, the seeds of civilization: farming, pharaohs, and laws. It's genuinely fascinating to look at what these early empires actually prioritized. You've got the Indus Valley civilization pouring its energy into underground drainage and super advanced toilet systems for public hygiene. But then, ancient Egypt took their massive resources and poured them into something completely different, building monumental pyramids and perfecting mummification. For them, it was all about ensuring their pharaoh's immortality and eternal rule in the afterlife. Now, as these early empires started expanding their borders, they inevitably crashed into each other. When the Hittite Empire attacked Kadesh, Egyptian pharaoh Ramesses II fought back hard with tens of thousands of men. But instead of total mutual destruction, this incredibly brutal battle actually ended in a draw. And that led to a totally groundbreaking innovation in 1258 BCE, the world's very first recorded peace treaty. It ushered in this era of shared prosperity and proved that, hey, peace could be just as profitable as war. Of course, as populations kept surging, rulers had to find new ways to maintain order at home. Enter King Hammurabi of Babylon in 1772 BCE. He literally carved 282 strict laws into a 7-foot stone slab. This code permanently ended any early illusions of human equality by forcing citizens into distinct castes. By law, a noble's bone was considered far more valuable than a plebeian's or a slave's. Order was established for sure, but at a really severe cost to human rights. Moving right along to our second era, philosophers, republics, and kings, the mind and the state. Over in the East, the Zhou dynasty introduced this incredibly ingenious political concept called the Mandate of Heaven. The idea was that heaven grants an emperor the right to rule based entirely on their virtue. But here's the catch. If a drought or famine struck, it meant heaven had revoked that mandate. Paired with philosophies like Confucianism and Taoism, this created a really powerful psychological engine that helped make the grueling life of ancient peasant farmers a bit more bearable. Meanwhile, over in Greece, you've got 2 wildly different experiments in government running side by side. On one hand, there's Sparta, a brutal, highly militaristic society built purely around warfare, completely supported by enslaved laborers called helots. On the other hand, you have Athens. Athens was a complex, somewhat chaotic democracy, where a council of 500 leaders was chosen completely at random by this mechanical device known as the Chlorotorion.
Not everyone was a fan of that whole democracy thing, though. The legendary philosopher Plato actually found it downright barbaric to hand political power to randomly selected citizens. He argued that just like you wouldn't want a random passenger navigating a ship at sea, you really don't want a random person navigating the state. Instead, he heavily advocated for a highly educated philosopher king who actually possessed the wisdom and logic needed to rule justly.
But when these incredibly different Greek societies were tested by a massive existential threat, the sprawling Persian Empire, 30 of those chaotic city-states finally banded together. At the Battle of Plataea, 110,000 Greek hoplites worked as a unit, brilliantly using the sloping terrain to push back a vastly larger Persian force of 150,000 men. It was an absolute defining victory that preserved Greek culture for centuries. Human ambition, however, has a way of dramatically reshaping the world. Following the world-conquering footsteps of leaders like Alexander the Great, Roman generals like Julius Caesar eventually realized they had the leverage to take absolute power for themselves. By defying the Senate and marching his army across the Rubicon River in 49 BCE, Caesar ignited a massive, bloody civil war.
That single defiant act was the catalyst that transitioned Rome from a republic into an autocratic empire. Which brings us to our third section, the Age of Faith, Belief, and Sword. If you look neutrally at the historical record across the globe, we see three incredibly distinct moments of immense spiritual origin. You have Siddhartha Gautama reaching enlightenment around 500 BCE, the birth of Jesus Christ under Roman rule in the 1st century AD, and the angel Gabriel appearing to Muhammad in 610 AD. These very localized, specific events would rapidly scale up to become the absolute ultimate drivers of human civilization. And this burgeoning faith, it created a massive duality for early empires. In India, Emperor Ashoka embraced Buddhist nonviolence after a horrifically bloody war. In Rome, Emperor Constantine legalized Christianity after reportedly seeing a vision before a battle. Muhammad managed to unite the entire Arabian Peninsula. Yet this exact same unifying power also sparked absolutely devastating holy wars. Pope Urban II launched the Crusades to take Jerusalem, which prompted leaders like Saladin to fiercely fight back and reclaim it. Okay, let's step into Section 4. Conquerors of the world, plagues, and hordes. So, fast forward a bit. Following the death of Charlemagne, his massive Holy Roman Empire was literally fractured into thirds by the Treaty of Verdun in 840 AD. Almost immediately, these newly divided, weakened lands were relentlessly attacked by Viking raiders. Terrified citizens, completely desperate for protection, ended up trading their freedom and their labor to local lords just to stay safe. That constant looming fear officially cemented the rigid system of European feudalism. 8%. I want you to think about that number. That is the staggering percentage of men in South Asia today who are direct descendants of Genghis Khan. Born an outcast, he managed to unite 1 million Mongols and conquer an empire that stretched all the way from the Sea of Japan to the Caspian Sea. He utilized immense, calculated terror and brutal tactics to completely subjugate the East. And just when you think armies are the biggest threat, humanity faced an enemy that swords literally couldn't fight. 75 to 200 million. That massive, tragic number represents the lives wiped out by the bubonic plague as it hitched a ride along the Silk Road and on trade ships. But this unfathomable tragedy actually had a crazy side effect. It caused such a massive labor shortage that it inadvertently forced surviving landowners to grant the remaining peasant farmers far better workers' rights and leverage. Finally, we arrive at Section 5, Renaissance to Revolution, Rebirth and Rights. In 1215, we get a huge shift in the law. The Magna Carta marks one of the very first times we see the absolute power of a monarch legally challenged and heavily restricted. Forced upon England's King John by his own barons, it established that even the king himself had to obey the law, officially introducing vital concepts like the right to a fair trial and habeas corpus. But look, even as the Renaissance was blossoming, bringing us transcendent art from absolute geniuses like Da Vinci and Michelangelo, the day-to-day political reality remained incredibly harsh. Thinkers like Niccolo Machiavelli were still documenting the brutal, fear-based reality of keeping the masses in line. He famously argued in The Prince that it is much safer for a ruler to be feared than loved, a very pragmatic, dark echo of those early rulers just trying to hold on to power at all costs. From here, this push and pull of power really accelerated. The Ottoman capture of Constantinople in 1453 definitively erased the very last remnants of the Roman Empire. That massive shift pushed Europe to look westward, leading Columbus to the Americas. Then, following brutal, continent-spanning conflicts like the 30 Years' War, the world started rapidly globalizing. And by 1776, American patriots were signing a document that declared a genuinely radical new concept for the time, that all men are created equal. So, human history is basically this constant, fascinating evolution of how we organize ourselves. We've journeyed all the way from the strict, deeply unequal castes of Hammurabi to 1776's bold Declaration of Equality. We've seen handmills, peace treaties, crusades, and plagues shape our very existence. Knowing exactly where we came from and how our social operating system was built, I want to leave you with this. What new ideas do you think will shape our next 3,000 years?